Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of September 18th, 2022. And this is an extremely special Virtual Enlightenment Salon because I am streaming live from Dublin, Ireland, from the Longevity Summit Dublin, which promises to be the biggest longevity-oriented event of 2022. With me, I have one of the organizers of the Longevity Summit Dublin, Martin O'Day. Martin, it's an honor to have you as our guest today. And please tell us about the Longevity Summit Dublin, how it came together, what it is intended to achieve, and how day one went in your estimation.
Very good. So thanks very much for having me. It's nice to talk to everybody. So it's been in the build-up for about 3 years. We tried to have this summit in 2020 originally, and then 2021, and eventually it's been successful. I suppose it's trying to do a number of things. One I would highlight that isn't the same as every other conference is that it is an attempt to kickstart a longevity movement and industry in Ireland, which I think has a lot of the ecosystem required for this to occur, but none of the kind of the awareness. So that's one of the primary goals from an Irish perspective, is just to kickstart the longevity industry here. It's also an opportunity for people to come together and to meet and to socialize. And as someone that has gone to these events for many years, that's something that I love. Like Didier, I met you in, I don't know if they can see who's on the call, but Didier, I met you in 2012 in Brussels, which was a long time ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago. And every event since has been amazing. People meet, people find common ground, they work together. There's still a huge collaborative feel to this industry as opposed to other areas, even in medicine, where everyone is under NDA and nobody talks to anybody about anything except maybe golf. So it's a wonderful community. So the idea of getting that community to come here and of doing things that would launch the longevity industry in Ireland combined. How did day one go? I think it went well. I mean, it was an additional day to what we had originally programmed. So maybe not as as fine-tuned as the next 2 days I would like to think will go, but I think we didn't have any enormous disasters that I'm aware of, which is positive.
Certainly no enormous disasters, otherwise we wouldn't be holding this stream. But as you can see, we have a few of the guests who are in attendance at Longevity Summit Dublin here with us. We have David Wood, we have Didier Coeurnelle, and of course, our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers are joining us from the United States. Our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg, and our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker. So I'm sending you the live long and prosper greeting from across the Atlantic Ocean. And also, I wanted to acknowledge our friend Rudy Hoffman joining us virtually. He writes, "How amazing is modern tech, enabling us to meet from around the world." And yes, Martin is a joint organizer with Aubrey, the one and only Aubrey de Grey. So Martin, could you tell us more about how the collaboration with Aubrey came together? Because this is a pivotal event for Aubrey, and I think he has been astonished himself at how large the turnout has been.
Yeah, so That's absolutely pivotal. It's not as long standing as people might assume. Like I said, we were trying to do this in 2019. I was going to events. Now, I knew Aubrey since 2000. Well, funnily enough, I was just thinking David Wood. I met Aubrey at one of David Wood's events in 2011 for the first time. But obviously, I've known Aubrey on and off. He's incredibly supportive of almost everybody he meets. Incredibly patient. I was thinking about that interview today. Sorry, not interview, but the conversation I had with Aubrey in 2011, when I knew absolutely nothing about what I was trying to talk about. But he still listened very patiently, and has been like that throughout, very supportive. And I think a few months ago we were discussing this conference, him as a speaker, and it just, a series of fortunate events, I'd call them, led to other conferences pivoting away from what had previously occurred, and then we decided that this would be Aubrey's third installment post Cambridge and Berlin, which obviously I'm thrilled with, and that brings another element to it and brings a lot of people to it as well. But yeah, it's been done a bit quick. We officially kind of launched this in May, and so to have the turnout we've had is amazing, but largely thanks to Aubrey, obviously. And he's thrown himself 100% into it, and it's brilliant, wonderful, delighted.
Absolutely, and I would like to echo your comments, Martin. Aubrey is incredibly kind and generous with his time, and the way he answered questions during his introductory overview session today was just inspiring to me as well, because he did hear out every questioner, and he found the nuances in that person's question to build upon and convey insights that I think are important for people who are new to this field to understand what the pursuit of longevity is really about.
Absolutely, and the patience that's required as well, I would not have, because when you explain something for the first time, there's some positive feedback in having it explained. But my God, when you explain it for the 12,000th time, you need to be a saint. And I've seen him do that over many, many years, which is a gift. It's a gift to be able to continuously bring people in and give them the right information. So yeah, it's wonderful that he's here. It's wonderful that he's thrown his weight into it. And it's, one of the 2 or 3 key things that I want this conference to be, is to be that third installation of this movement.
Yes, absolutely. Now, to our officers in the United States, do you have any questions for Martin while we have him here? Let's see.
I'd take
Ben.
one.
Yes.
Martin, tell us about what Ireland does have going on for longevity industry research, etc.
It doesn't have much in terms of longevity specifically, but it has a very, very strong medtech sector and a very strong pharma sector. It has a strong economy, and it has a kind of a developed skill of taking American money into Europe over the last 30 years, which is interesting in itself. So it has the corporate law and corporate finance required to deal with very big deals, very big sums of money. And then you have that EU English language positioning, all of these things that are very well advertised by the Irish government, but they haven't embraced this yet. And no disrespect to them, but I'm in the process of dragging them into longevity as opposed to welcoming them. But I think they will be dragged, and we have some. We have some people in attendance tomorrow, and somebody at the gala dinner who's in a fairly senior position. The Lord Mayor of the city is going to present the awards and so on. But it's one of my missions is that next year we will have the Prime Minister and we will have the Minister for Health, and hopefully they will be asking for tickets. And I might pause a moment before saying yeah, sure.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's interesting too, because as far as I'm aware, Ireland is a country of a bit over 5 million people. And would you say, Martin, it is easier to influence the highest echelons of government in a country of that size as contrasted with, say, the United States? The United States, which has 300 million plus people.
Yes, yes, definitely. There's good and bad to that, but yeah, it's no, absolutely. I found myself having something I certainly can't discuss here, but I found myself having a conversation with someone once that was really pivotal to an enormously big decision that the government was involved in, and I was aghast at the fact that I was being asked my opinion. I was thinking, well, why, like, really, should you not have somebody much more expert advising you in this matter? So I think it's to do with having 5 million people. They run out of people to ask, maybe. But yeah, that can be a bit disconcerting. But it's absolutely the case that if you can get people on board, and in a country this size, there are certain things that would bring like a critical mass of decision makers and politicians on board, and then it becomes like a team sport. They're all in. They're all supportive. They're, you know, you almost don't have room for the counter side, I think.
Yes, and that is quite promising, because I think sometimes we in the United States tend to be a bit US centric in our focus, and it's understandable to a certain extent. We are at the center of an empire that is, it is literally an empire that is influencing the rest of the world, sometimes in ways that we might not want it to influence the rest of the world. But nonetheless, I think if we look outside of that framework, we can find opportunities where a particular country can be more innovative than the United States and can embrace these ideas earlier and be a pioneer and be an example to other countries. And this could be Ireland. This could be another country as well, like South Africa, for instance, which one of our forthcoming guests is going to talk about soon as well. But it was interesting just walking around Dublin, which I highly recommend to people who visit the city, because I stumbled upon so many embassies and departments of government, and I think I walked in front of the seat of government itself, where the equivalent of the prime minister is located. I can spell the title, I can't pronounce it, so I'll let Martin pronounce it.
Taoiseach.
Taoiseach, yes.
I believe the latest British Prime Minister has had some fun with that pronunciation. So you're not on your own. She talked to the Taoiseach recently. But yeah, Taoiseach.
Yes. So yes, the seat of government, the office of the Taoiseach, was right there behind a gate, and I could walk up to it, photograph it. I couldn't walk in, but I am certain that the government of Ireland is more accessible than the government of the United States. Had I done that in front of the White House, I don't know what the consequences would have been these days. But it is astonishing that you have been able to host this conference in the middle of Dublin and have the attention of all of these highly situated officials. So any of our attendees, our panelists, have any questions for Martin? Oh, here's an interesting question from our friend Mike Lazine. How has Ireland been affected by the death of Queen Elizabeth II?
She did. It's been I don't know. Should I? I'm very talkative at the moment. So honestly, it's a really, really interesting history. I would be as far from a monarchist as anybody could possibly be. I would have a major kind of philosophical problem with it. But that lady has a really interesting history with Ireland. I don't know if that's worth discussing in 1 minute. So if she had come here 30 years ago, for a good portion of my life, if she had come here, she would have been shot. So she didn't come here, which is that's a statement of fact, you know. No, I wouldn't have shot her, just to be clear, but there were people who would state that was their intention. And she came here in 2011, and I was just talking to someone about pronouncing something recently, but even when she came in 2011 and the countries were reconciling, and it was 10 years, 11 years post peace, 13 years post the peace settlement in Northern Ireland, it was still, you know, difficult and challenging and everything else. And she walked around to a whole bunch of different historically significant places in Ireland. and not of a British background, but of an Irish background. And she did all those things without opening her mouth. She never said anything, just respectful. And then she eventually got up to make a speech. So the whole country was watching this. It was the first time a British monarch had spoken in 106 years in Ireland. First time a British monarch had been in Ireland in almost 100 years. And she began by saying, Anuk Duran agus a Cordia. So her first little sentence was in Gaelic, in the Irish language. And I swear to God, she won the whole country over in one sentence. She also pronounced it perfectly, which is not easy. So that means president and friends, which was an exceptional piece of diplomacy and incredibly skillful. So I think she was actually greatly liked in Ireland, surprisingly.
Yes, and I think that is an important story to illustrate how the path of reconciliation can occur. Sometimes it takes a long time. It may take years, it may take decades, but old hostilities can be de-escalated.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a different world now.
Yes. So our friend David Shoemaker wonders, what is the biggest highlight of day one, in your opinion? And we will actually go around and ask our other attendees this question as well. So Martin, after you respond, we can hear from Didier and David Wood.
The biggest highlight for me, I've been running around the place a lot, so I haven't gotten to listen to the talks as I should have. But I guess just having people arrive, that's a terrible answer. But it is nice to see. I keep forgetting how many people are coming, and then I see people that I haven't seen in a number of years, and it's lovely to do so. And that's been happening repeatedly all day long. So seeing kind of old friends is the most enjoyable thing, if not the highlight.
Yes, and I do think that that's a great answer, Martin, because a large component of this conference is building connections within our community, and sometimes it's reinforcing old connections, sometimes it's forming new connections and helping us grow this movement. Now, Didier, what was your impression as to the biggest highlight of day one?
Well, I would say a few months ago, when this was organized, I was kind of thinking it will be interesting, but not more than that. And already the first day, and even also in the preparation of this event, I was impressed by the work of David, and also by the work of by the work of Emma, who is working with Martin, and by the work of Martin. Then during these first speeches, I already heard quite a few interesting things. Yeah, I have to. Sorry, that's it for the moment.
All right. Thank you, Didier.
Great Thursday. That's it.
Thank you, Didier. And now let's hear from David Wood.
So I had a fascinating day. I'll first comment a little bit about the impact of meetings, the impact of events. And often there are impacts that are not clear at the time, but they can grow into something huge. And I got a very pleasant surprise earlier when Martin was discussing how he met Aubrey de Grey. And I hadn't realized he had actually met Aubrey de Grey and changed the trajectory of his own life, I guess, as a result of coming to an event I organized. And I have to admit, being a data geek, I checked my registration records for various events, and I found it was on the 24th of 2010, 24th of April 2010. Aubrey gave a talk at a large event I organized in London, and Martin, you were there.
Oh my God, I missed it by a year.
Yes.
I thought it was 20. Oh my God.
Well, I looked on 2011's event first, and you might have come in incognito because you weren't on the list, as it happens. So, but obviously the seed had been planted. And I know that one of the other prominent people who are going to be taking part in the event later also got his life trajectory changed as a result this time of a talk I'd given about the abolition of aging. So sometimes a small thing that we do can have a big effect. And who knows, there may be people watching this YouTube video now who weren't aware about the possibilities that we're going to discuss. And this could lead them to become a leader in one or other aspects of this great cause, the abolition of aging, the progress of rejuvenation, biotechnology. In terms of the things that stood out for me, one is I think it's clear that what happened today exceeded the expectations of at least some of the organizers. One of the organizers, a very friendly gentleman, said to me, "It's a shame they hadn't organized the talks today in a room double the size." You know, they hadn't been sure how many people would come, and they thought the room would be big enough, but frankly, it was a bit of a crush. And moreover, each talk was just full of fascinating information, and there was lots of questions that people wanted to ask, but there was no time. In a sense, that's another success, because it's far better to leave people wanting more than to have people bored and fed up. In terms of the talks that most inspired me, I'll pick one for now, and I might come back to others later. It was a talk about AI, using AI to work out in advance the behaviors of various chemicals. And this has been done for a while. There are various AI companies that feed in lots of information about different molecules and then see what the AI system recommends as possible treatments for different diseases. But what was said today went beyond that, and I was impressed. It was by a company called Cortex Discovery, that's Cortex Discovery. The speaker was somebody called Ivan de Weber, and they had a more impressive artificial intelligence solution that needed less training, less help from the humans rather. So instead of the humans feeding in a lot of information about each molecule, the system was able to work out by itself from very general sets of data how these molecules were likely to behave. And that will speed up even further the possibilities to work out which drugs will have which effects, which drugs might have which side effects, how drugs will operate in combination. So the possibility is that the very long time period it currently takes to discover drugs and trial them could be speeded up. And we've said this for a while, but what's happened with AI recently is that the systems are becoming much more intelligent in the sense that you don't need to explain so much to them. You just show them lots of data and it works out the structures by itself. It figures out the patterns by itself. Whereas before, we humans needed to do more of the structuring by ourselves. So that was fascinating. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about what several of the other speakers had said before either. And I've got lots of homework. So I'm already glad to be here. And that's before we start talking about the networking. I might come back to that later.
Yes, thank you, David. So now we have a special appearance by the one and only Dr. Aubrey de Grey. So Aubrey, if you can...
I'll take my...
How can I do this? How can I do this?
Yes, so
Woo!
Aubrey, welcome to our virtual enlightenment salon.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yes. So what are your impressions of day one of the Longevity Summit?
I'm on cloud fucking nine. It's like, you know, it's been so many years, it's been 3 whole years since we had a proper meeting, right? And it's not even supposed to begin until tomorrow, but in the later stages of planning it, it became apparent that no, that wouldn't do. You know, like we had to extend it, in a prequel kind of way, right? So we've been doing stuff all day today, and there's been far more people here today than I was expecting. And you know, it's like, you know, we're back to normal again. It's like COVID's over almost. You know, it feels that way. There's so many people here that I've not met for 3 years, that old friends, and there's also, just as with my my previous conference, there's so many newcomers here who are just inspired and who just want to, absorb this and understand how they can make a difference and everything. I'm on cloud nine.
Wonderful. So you have mentioned that these conferences are one of the major ways for new people to enter the field, not just new people, but active new people,
Right.
people who are going to take leadership positions in the field. And for someone who is new to longevity, who may be encountering it for the first time via the summit, or even say watching a live stream like our salon today, what does the path look like from here to there?
First thing I want to say is, in answer to that there is definitely not one path. Everybody's path is different because it depends on their prior experience, their expertise, their temperament, their personality. Everybody's different. And that's really why the conferences are so important, that it's the way to gravitate to your best place in the movement. You end up just like talking to so many people of very, very different types and just being inspired, thinking of things that you'd never have thought of before. Of course, the talks are also really important. Really good science gets presented here, really good stuff outside of the science, like, we've got talks here from medics, but also we've got talks from advocates, and researchers and everything. So that's critical. But I believe that the real ingredient, the real magic sauce that made all these conferences, ever since I began doing them in 2003, made them so effective, is that we have a lot of time allocated to recreation, to networking. So this is, and I don't claim originality for that. This is the concept that's driven, for example, the success of the Gordon conferences, which happen in many different fields. But it's very clear to me that that's why conferences matter, and especially, in fact, I would go so far as to say only face-to-face conferences. We've got much better over the past 2 years at doing virtual events, whether it's just the average Zoom call or whether it's an actual conference. But there are certain things that are irreplaceable that you cannot do except face-to-face.
Interesting. And would you say bringing new talent into the field is one of those tasks that is much better accomplished face-to-face?
It's the one, it's probably the single most important one that's best accomplished face-to-face. And it's not just this conference. So, many of your audience will know that a month or two ago, there was a retreat that I inspired, that was in the backwoods of the Sierras in California, called Less Death, at which something like 50 newcomers came along and were, exactly this was done, right? So we need to do this a lot more than we are. And I see it over and over again. It's been so effective. That's not going to change.
Yes. Now, you have mentioned recently on several occasions that the major bottleneck for the movement is no longer funding. It is more getting enough talented researchers to essentially join this particular field where they may have various options regarding how to allocate their talents. So do you believe we've largely overcome that particular bottleneck, or do we still have a way to go?
I think we still have a way to go. And furthermore, I would go to first say it's not just researchers. So this applies to, so coming back to Less Death for a moment, this retreat that happened recently, that brought in people whose main credentials are at the level of entrepreneurialism, and who are passionate about the mission, but they haven't a clue how to apply their entrepreneurial skills. And so, helping them to meet the right people, to partner with the right people that don't have the entrepreneurial skills, but do have technical, important technologies that they want to take forward. And that's just one example. As I said, it's also about advocacy. It's also about other types of education. So yeah, the whole melting pot is the magic thing.
Yes. And Rudy Hoffman is wondering more about what Less Death is. So Rudy, we had Mark Hamalainen on as our Virtual Enlightenment Salon guest in June. You may be interested in our conversation with him. But essentially, there was a longevity summer camp held in July in Nevada City, California, about a 2-hour drive from where I live. And this was where a lot of promising young researchers received career guidance and assistance as to how they should direct their talents and their energies. What kind of feedback have you gotten from that event, Aubrey?
I'll actually be showing, I might even show a few statistics tomorrow, because Mark did a little bit of, feedback research on this. I've never seen numbers like this for any event of any kind, of any sort, ever. Like the satisfaction rating was like 98%, people who said that they'd already made connections that were changing their directions with like 70% of them. I mean, like, it's just like mind blowing. Yeah, and obviously I'm going to be supporting future events of that nature going forward.
Excellent, excellent.
It's very like this this kind of conference, but more like education centric, if you like. Where the main focus is to help young people to learn stuff, rather than to have the existing senior researchers be educating each other, which is a bit more what my conference has been about.
Now, over the years, have you observed any difference in how various generations of young people respond to the prospect of longevity escape velocity? So I would have been in the position of such a young person perhaps 18 years ago when I first learned about your work. How does the current young generation compare to my young generation?
Okay, so there's two interesting things about how you phrased that question. One thing is you phrased it specifically in terms of the younger generation, and the other thing you talked specifically about longevity escape velocity rather than like rejuvenation in general, right? I would like to answer a more general question because it kind of wants to put it in context. Over the past 20 years, since I started talking heavily about rejuvenation, there was a 10-year period or so where people in the mainstream of academia, and indeed people in the wider world, were not really taking rejuvenation seriously. They didn't really yet believe that it was a way to go. And that has pretty much entirely ended as of maybe 10 years ago. Rejuvenation as a way to go damage repair is considered to be a completely respectable concept. But there I'm talking about the academic community. The thing is, in the wider world, I think really it's more like a, there was already a community that just got it at once. And then there was a community that just didn't, and to some extent still doesn't. But that's kind of shrinking over time, slowly, step by step, in consequence of it being seen that experts are accepting it. So that's all, that's the main way in which that's changing. Whereas if we talk about longevity escape velocity, we're in a very different situation. Essentially, no other experts other than me are willing to embrace that publicly. They'll run away very fast. Some of them don't run away at all fast when you talk to them over a beer, but that's a different thing, right? So because they just think it's politically too incendiary. And of course, that does have knock-on effects in terms of how other people see it. So we've still got a long way to go before people really get that the first 1,000-year-old person is almost certainly less than 10 years younger than the first 150-year-old. We've got to the point where people are not scared to actually say, yeah, the first 150-year-old is probably already alive, but LEV is just a bit too mathematical for people. I don't know. It's just like, I'm disappointed by my colleagues in that regard, but there you go. But then coming to the other thing I was picking up on in the way you asked the question, the fact that you asked specifically about the younger generation. I'm not really sure why you did that, because the younger generation have always been more receptive to these radical concepts, just like any other radical concepts, right, than older people. And so, I haven't really regarded them as my target, largely because they don't have any money. And I'm interested in people who can help me financially to do this. Of course, when I say I don't have any money, that has, in a very real sense, ceased to be the case in the past few years as the crypto community has grown. And indeed, of course, if we look at the crypto contributions to longevity, starting with Vitalik Buterin, who started donating to Stance in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. In the past year and a half, 2 years, it's exploded. I want to give a real shout out to James Fickle, who is a name that most people don't know, but he made plenty of money out of Ethereum, and he happens to be very highly regarded among other even bigger hitters. And he's been able to leverage that to get a lot of money into longevity over the past year or two. There are other really young people who are getting involved. And then if we come to what Richard Hart did with Hex, right? We got more than 2,000 people donating to us, a total of over $27 million a year ago. And I don't know, I haven't seen an actual breakdown of the age distribution of the people who donated, but I know that a lot of them are pretty young. So in some sense, you're right in talking about the younger generation, but I also want to really emphasize that there are plenty of people who are not so young and who are still also becoming progressively more enthused.
Interesting. And of course, you have spoken about the possibility of an inflection point in public attitudes during the next several years. First, do you still believe that inflection point is coming? And second, do you believe that events like this are going to go a long way toward preparing the public for that inflection point?
Yeah, so I want to say that the best way to look at those two things that you just mentioned is not as sequential, but parallel. That the bringing in of wider understanding of the value and the plausibility of bringing aging under proper medical control, that's obviously a process. It takes time, and a huge amount of it is herd mentality. Just feeling it's safe to be thinking something, and once you think it's safe to be thinking something, you might start to be thinking it's safe to say it. Right? It's the same thing for people who write checks, right? Since forever, I've known that a huge part of the problem is the spectrum of perception of plausibility of this. I've had, wealthy people who literally will tell me to my face that they would like to write me a check, but their wife won't let them. Because,
And they don't have a way of concealing the donation from their wife?
Well, we all know what happens if you try to conceal something from your wife. It doesn't often end well. So I'm not going there. But you get the idea.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, Aubrey, because I think sometimes public attitudes are affected by the facts on the ground and what people perceive as the progress having been in recent years, or in some cases the lack thereof. And this is where Rudy Hoffman's question, I think, is relevant. Rudy is wondering if the escape velocity concept, or at least how you approach the likelihood of its arrival, has been altered by average life expectancy in the US decreasing by, as Rudy cites it, 3 years or so of late.
Sure. Obviously very sad that that there has been this decrease in life expectancy, and we all know that it's overwhelmingly because of COVID. Though, to be honest, it was already going to be the US that was going to show the worst situation there, simply because it was already so much the country suffering the most from the obesity epidemic, right? Nevertheless, no, it has nothing to do with longevity escape velocity at all. We will get to LEV as a result of new technologies that don't yet exist that will work just as well on people who are a little bit more, broken by whatever means, whether it's COVID, whether it's type 2 diabetes, whatever. So no, it's got no relationship.
do you believe that there's going to be a particular trigger event that will lead the public consciousness to change? Like people will...
Actually, I do. And it's a little complicated. It's a multi-step event, but it's a single event in terms of actually, the definition of the event itself. The multi-step aspect is how the event is disseminated. So the event will be a sufficient amount of increase in longevity of mice with interventions that are initiated when the mice are already in middle age, so like 2/3 of the way through their natural lifespan. This is something that I've called robust mouse rejuvenation, and it's not the same as longevity escape velocity because it doesn't necessarily imply that we'll be able to carry on improving those therapies fast enough. But on its own, what it will do is completely make it impossible for people to carry on saying that the medical control of aging is science fiction and that it will never happen. Now, the question then is, where are we in the race to achieve robust mass rejuvenation? And my new foundation, which I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, is going to have that as its number one theme. We want to push the rate of progress towards robust mass rejuvenation much faster. So lots of money is going to be spent, especially doing one thing that is not well aligned with the incentive structure of other groups, namely the combining of therapies that individually have some promise and the figuring out the determination of how best to combine them for the maximum amount of synergy. I believe that even a rather modest amount of that, in other words, combining maybe even only 3 or 4 therapies, has a fairly good chance of being able to take mice that maybe would normally live on average 2.5 years, doing exactly nothing to them until they're already 1.5 years old, so they've got 1 year left, right? And doubling that. Now, the reason why I think that is so important, coming back to your actual question, is that it's the kind of thing that will give my colleagues, the other expert biologists of aging who do a bunch of interfacing with the general public, it will give those people permission to actually really say, you know what, I mean, they won't exactly say Aubrey de Grey was right all along, obviously not, but they will kind of say, you know what, yeah, we're in striking distance now. And that is all it's going to take for Oprah to start saying, you know what, if we're in striking distance, let's do it a little soon, to 100,000 people a day, at which point it will become impossible to get elected unless you have a manifesto commitment to put really proper money into this.
Do you think it would help in terms of achieving robust mouse rejuvenation to encourage every research study involving mice to also look at their maximum lifespan? So instead of exterminating the mice past a certain arbitrary endpoint, they let the mice live for as long as possible and see what long-term effects that intervention has actually had?
Yeah, that's an absolutely excellent question. There is definitely a tradition, a habit, among researchers who look at aspects of aging in mice to prioritize work that involves killing the mice, stuff that involves like, grinding them up in one way or another. And sometimes such experiments understand what you just said, and the researchers will keep some of the mice alive. But of course, the fewer you don't sacrifice, right? The fewer you keep alive, the harder it's to get statistical significance on your data. So there would be enormous value in incentivizing researchers not to do that, to keep many mice alive, keep a lot more mice alive than they currently would.
Yes, I completely agree with you on that, and I hope any researchers planning on doing experiments with mice are listening to what Aubrey is saying right now.
Well, it's not they that have to listen, because they already know this. It's the people who pay them.
Ah,
Right.
yes. Perhaps we just need some better, more knowledgeable people to pay them, and that can change.
That is completely true.
Yes. So I would like to give our panelists the opportunity to ask Aubrey any questions while we have him here. Who would like to begin?
Let me start with Rudy. Rudy just said, did Aubrey talk about a new group he is heading that to be announced tomorrow? Yes, I did. Patience.
Patience indeed.
You have 12, you have, no, what is it now? 10 hours to wait, maybe not 11 hours.
Yes. So day 2 will be bigger than day 1. Everyone, watch this space. So anyone, Jason, please go ahead.
What's Aubrey's secret to his patience and how he can be so cool even to the lowliest person? And that's such a, you were called a saint earlier for that, and I would almost have to agree that is a very good talent. I'm wondering about that. Patience.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. I don't think of myself as patient. Not at all. Not at all. I guess I have the right people around me to help me to prioritize. And indeed, there are, of course, times when I need to restrain myself. And when in the long run it becomes, it's profitable that I restrain myself. But I don't think of myself as a patient person. I'm always impatient. I'm always in a hurry. I'm always an angry young man trying to save as many lives as possible as quickly as possible.
Yes, indeed. And I think people find your enthusiasm, your passion contagious, which is one reason why this event has such considerable attendance and why it can inspire so many people to enter the field.
The word passion is important here. I think you're completely right, but I want to highlight the word passion. Yeah, I feel that a lot of how I have been able to inspire people is by being publicly angry, you know, by you know, not just having good information, but actually embarrassing people into not being just complacent or fatalist about this whole thing.
Indeed, indeed. So, of course, there are as many different possible advocacy strategies as there are different personality types. What types of advocacy strategies do you think we could use more of in the movement at large? What has been underemphasized or underrepresented, perhaps?
Well, so my attitude to advocacy has always been somewhat pragmatic in the sense of understanding that there are people who are just, you know, dead set against this. They've just got too many prejudices, too many, you know, irrational reasons to think that aging is a blessing in disguise or whatever. And I don't expect ever to convert those people on my own, or even not on my own, but you know, quickly to being advocates. But I always think that even very incremental progress is very valuable. And that doesn't only refer to people who are on the fence, you know, they're kind of basically in favor, but they haven't quite got as far as writing a check and tipping them over the edge into getting involved. And of course, I don't just, when I say writing a check, I'm abbreviating there, because I also think that, you know, interviewing the right people or, you know, doing the right science, these are just as important as writing the check, right? But yeah, you got the idea. But the point is that there's also enormous value in taking people who are, you know, vigorously opposed to this, who really don't think of aging as a medical problem at all and don't want to think of it that way, and somehow attenuating their opposition. So their opposition becomes less influential to other people, right? Even if they're definitely not converted, just, less opposed. So there's many things to do in advocacy. And certainly what the stuff I'm going to be announcing tomorrow morning will include a lot of that. I believe that as we move forward on science and as the conversation in the wider world moves forward to take this whole thing more seriously than they used to, our advocacy options are also evolving, right? The people that we can talk to who feel they ought to actually listen are, they're starting to include, people in the corridors of power who would never have thought that there might be votes in this in the past, and they might be looking at saying, well, maybe there aren't votes now either, but it's coming, and they better be ready.
Yes. I'm reminded of a panel that was hosted in December with Newt Gingrich and Steve Israel, who both surprisingly expressed a great deal of sympathy for longevity and life extension. And they essentially said, if they had a way to make this politically viable to their congressional colleagues, they would be willing to help.
Right. That is definitely where things are going. The idea of having, for example, a caucus in Congress that actually pursues this, that would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. But now it's being very much not only thought about, but created.
Yes, indeed. Now, Alex has an interesting question. We know, Aubrey, that you are also advocating regarding cryonics. When do you think people will really push to make it more accepted? How to make it happen along with the funding?
So I'll be saying a bit about that tomorrow as well. The work because, as you say, I have been advocating. I've been a prominent supporter of cryonics for a long time. It's natural that I would want to promote research in that area. And I've been doing so, but not under the auspices of Science Research Foundation. And going forward, I would like to do it on a bigger scale, more overtly, more directly. So there'll be a bit about that tomorrow.
Yes, exciting news to come. Thank you to Aubrey. Now, any of our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers or David Wood or Didier, any questions for Aubrey while we have him? Let's see here. David Wood, please.
Well, I'd like to give the floor to Rudy Hoffman again, because I thought Rudy asked another nice question, a good question a little bit back, which was, don't we have rejuvenation, robust mouse rejuvenation already in terms of treatments with like metformin, rapamycin, and so forth?
Yeah,
so
let me step in, David. So absolutely, that's an important question. And it arises from, a misunderstanding perhaps of the way that I defined that term, robust mouse rejuvenation. So I said that what we need to do is double, or possibly I think I originally said treble, the remaining lifespan of mice that are already in middle age, so like 2/3 of the way through their natural lifespan, before we do anything to them. So the current situation, in terms of what we can do, for example, with mice that are already 18 months old, and that would normally live to, let's say, 30 months, is very much less than that. We can add maybe 10 or 20% to their remaining lifespan, and that's just not good enough to be interesting, because we can do that just by not giving them as much food as they would like, right? If we want to really impress my colleagues, get the field to be sufficiently, impressed is the right word, to really change their rhetoric, then I think we need several times more magnitude of life extension in such an experiment than what we can do today.
Yes. Thank you, Aubrey. And I hope that robust mouse rejuvenation can be achieved, especially if the researchers are incentivized to treat mice in the correct way. And I know, Didier, you are also an important advocate for not killing experimental mice and treating them humanely. Would you like to say a few remarks about that?
Yeah, just I was very happy to hear Aubrey saying that. Well, I'm not surprised. So of course we are living concerning a test on mice and rats a strange period where most experiments for longevity are done without taking a look if mice or rats are really living longer. And there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is the famous publish or perish. Another one is, yeah, it's expensive to keep, well, relatively expensive to keep animals alive. And I learned not long ago that another problem is regulations concerning the treatment of animals, that you are supposed to euthanize them if they are suffering. And of course, since aging and the end of the aging is suffering, there are people considering that you cannot let rats and mice die of old age.
So Didier, let me step in there.
Yeah,
So
yeah, go ahead.
That last problem that you mentioned is not really a problem. And the reason it's not is because interventions that increase lifespan, they always do it by increasing health span, which means that even if we do this euthanizing thing, we are still comparing like with like. We are taking mice, let's say the controls, and we are euthanizing them, you know, a week, maybe 3 weeks before they would naturally die. And then we're taking the treated animals, and we're also euthanizing those about the same amount of time before they would naturally die.
Yeah, but
so it really doesn't matter.
On one side I understand. On the other side, you are obliged to kill these animals before they die of old age. And
No,
of
no,
course,
no,
then there is
only when they're sick, and they're sick because of old
yeah,
age.
yeah.
So we're still comparing like with like. The amount of time that we shorten the lifespan by euthanizing them is the same for the controls as it is for the treated animals, and therefore we still have the same difference between the two.
There's still a little bit of a subjective thing when you decide to kill them, and also I know, for example, for one of the experiments for that Hills is supporting the experiment with rats organized by Harold Catcher in Mumbai at the moment. 2 months ago, the person working with the rats was saying, "Oh, they will die soon," and they're still alive. So,
but are they sick? I mean,
they are well. They are not. They are not very sick, but they are losing weight. And normally, when they are losing weight, they die soon. But again, this is
that's the point, right? That's the point, right? We want to know how long they stay healthy. I mean, reasonably healthy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly, you know, lifespan is a side effect of health span, as I always say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting conversation, and these are the kinds of conversations that need to happen ultimately to help refine experimental protocols and make sure they are achieving what we want them to achieve.
Yeah.
Now, David Shoemaker asks an interesting question. Have investors in life extension been in attendance at the summit?
So I don't know that there are all that many investors here, but I'm fine with that because, well, first of all, my friends in Germany, in Berlin, who helped with organizing the conferences that were the precursor series to this one, they're organizing a meeting just 2 or 3 weeks from now, which is specifically for investors and for investees Moreover, just 1 week from now in Switzerland, I'll be speaking at a conference, which again is just for investors. So we don't need every conference to do everything.
Indeed, indeed. So different conferences for different purposes. Ben Ballweg, would you like to ask a question?
You are
unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes. He is going to unmute himself. I know he was quite enthusiastic about having you here, Aubrey. Go ahead, Ben.
That is any writing project coming up for you. I know that it's hard to prioritize and do a book, but maybe Michael Ray just wants to take the reins and do the whole thing and just get your name on it. And anything going on like that?
I remember making fun of David Sinclair. David and I have been friends for like 20 years. And when his book came out, I was starting to tell people that he was so pissed off that I wouldn't write a sequel to my book that he decided he had to do it himself. I'm not sure he quite had that real reason for writing his book. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I kind of feel like at this point, there's so many people writing really good books. Like Sergey Young wrote a fantastic book. Neil Boswell wrote a fantastic book. Andrew Still wrote a fantastic book. It's not clear that there's much reason. There's much. It's not clear to me that there's much that is not already being said.
Understood. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So,
just to say,
yes, Didier, go ahead.
Two things I want to say. So first, I agree with Aubrey. There are many good books, and I would say not enough real experiments and real clinical tests also for humans, especially the metformin test, the TRIM study, who are supposed to, or who are maybe beginning, but that we wait already since a few years. And the second thing I want to say is it's great to have this conference in the European Union because it's probably, well, it's certainly the best place in the world to have access to some public money and with perfect, well, almost perfect infrastructure concerning the health system, the social security system. And for example, I was just taking a look at the life expectancy in Ireland, and I didn't know it's one of the best countries in the world concerning the life expectancy. That's all.
Yes. Thank you, Didier. And now, Art Ramon, do you have any question for Aubrey?
Well, just one small question. Are you familiar with Wim Hof and his meditation methods? You kind of remind me a lot of him. And he's been able to do some kind of amazing feats with, being able to submerge himself with cold water and ice. But he has aged in the years I followed him. So I was just curious if you knew about him or his work.
Yeah, sorry, no. I'm also not fond of cold water.
Yes, I keep hearing about the Wim Hof technique and immersing oneself in cold water. My thinking is, if it were that simple, then I think we would see empirical evidence for some people living much longer than others.
That is exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Now, we have a question from Ageless Partners. In parallel to rejuvenation, do we need to solve the rate of telomere decline to avoid disruption in gene expression due to epigenetic changes or drift?
All right. So, yeah, I'm sorry to be a little like, of all the questions I get asked that I wish I would not get asked as much as I do, the questions about telomeres are right up there. Yeah. The thing you have to remember is that all cells have a gene for an enzyme called telomerase, which extends telomeres. So when we see telomeres getting shorter with age, we're seeing a phenomenon where telomerase is, for whatever is not compensating for the telomere shortening that happens predominantly as a result of DNA replication, which can't replicate the telomere, and also to some extent as a result of DNA damage. But then we have to ask, for any gene, why would it be not doing enough, right, to do the thing that we expect it to do? And there's usually a reason for that. In fact, there's almost always a reason for that, because the extent to which a gene is expressed, to the extent to which the activity of the gene is modulated, is something that's under evolutionary control, something that we are doing at the level we're doing it for a reason that relates to health of the organism, including longevity of the organism. And of course, that's not the whole story, because in the current world, we have this thing called civilization, you know, with medicine stuff, and the selective pressures that existed in the wild are very much different than what exists now. But still, the first place to start, the first thing to ask ourselves is, why did evolution make things the way they are when we were in the time prior to civilization? In the case of telomeres, and in particular telomerase, we've known for many, many years that there is benefit in expressing low levels of telomerase, namely that we protect ourselves against cancer. And that is, you know, it's remarkable to me that people are people find it so easy to forget that. If we were to somehow stimulate the level of expression of telomerase, as of now, we genuinely would have, in my view, a risk of having a lot more cancer. So we shouldn't do it yet. That's not this. I mean, I want to emphasize, however, the word "yet," because it's abundantly conceivable that an organism might, you know, be able to play fast and loose with telomerase if they didn't get cancer. And we might be able to develop medicines that simply completely defeat cancer, you know, fairly soon. If we did, we would be in a very different situation in terms of the pros and cons of playing with telomerase.
Interesting. Now, Alex states that telomeres may be a point of friction between you and Bill Andrews, but the way I've heard Bill Andrews describe it is that the two of you actually agree on the underlying science. It's just that perhaps your areas of emphasis are a bit different. But how would you characterize your respective views on the subject?
I think that, so Bill has indeed said that, and I absolutely agree. That's an accurate description. That Bill may feel that the likelihood that we can just intervene to stimulate telomerase expression today with the cancer therapies that we have today and get away with it is higher than the likelihood that I would assign to that scenario. But we absolutely would agree that it would be better if we had therapies against cancer that changed that balance in favor of the safety level of stimulated telomerase.
Yes. So your positions are not as far apart as they may seem from a layperson standpoint. And that's the impression that I got from speaking with Bill as well. Now, Jason wonders with regard to why elephants don't get cancer. So do elephants have less telomerase expression?
Elephants are pretty interesting. They definitely live a long time. They don't live as long as we do, but they live nearly as long. And by the Pareto principle, as it's called, they ought to live a lot less long. They ought to get cancer a lot more often than us, simply because they are larger. They have more cells in them, each of which has the opportunity to become cancer. But that's actually dangerous to think, because an animal that's larger has something going for it as well as something not going for it. Yes, it's got more cells, but it's also got a smaller surface to volume ratio. which means that each individual cell in an elephant doesn't need to work so hard in terms of burning energy, burning fuel to make energy in order to stay warm, as what we do. And as we all know, the burning of fuel to make energy, to release energy, is toxic. It creates free radicals, which are damaging to DNA. So that means that we have to modulate the Pareto principle and say, well, actually, we don't know whether a larger animal that's warm-blooded would, in fact, be likely to get more cancer than a smaller one. Then, saying all of that, though, there is another thing that was relatively recently discovered, only a few years ago, when people started to sequence the whole genome of elephants. They had a look and they found that elephants have a lot of copies of a really important anti-cancer gene called P53. Now, there is, as I understand it, still a little bit of controversy about the level of expression of those various copies. Some people were saying that, at the beginning anyway, that a lot of these genes were not expressing active P53 protein. I do not actually have recent information about where that controversy stands. Nevertheless, the point about having lower free radical production is probably the biggest reason why elephants do not get all that much more cancer than we do.
Very interesting. And speaking of cancer, Mike Lazine wonders, do we have a possible replacement for chemotherapy among any of the projects that you could think of in the rejuvenation field?
We sure do. So chemotherapy and radiotherapy are the ultimate blunt instrument against cancer. It's been well understood, of course, for a long, long, long time that they have enormous side effects in terms of messing up stem cell populations and so on, especially. But yeah, we're getting there. I mean, I believe that we have still a long way to go before we hit diminishing returns in terms of cancer immunotherapy. It's really going well still. Certainly been much more successful thus far with a few types of cancer than it has for most cancers. But it's improvements are being made all the time. And indeed, there's one speaker here, Lou Hawthorne, who'll be speaking, I forget whether it's tomorrow or Tuesday, about a way to get immunotherapy to work much better by essentially making the tumor more accessible to the immune system. On top of that, though, there's also an approach which I'm calling Wilt 2.0. So WILT is the name, the acronym that I gave to an approach to addressing cancer very universally by preventing cancers from extending their telomeres. And this WILT 2.0 is an enormous improvement on that. It's a way of getting cancer cells that are expressing telomerase to die really quickly without even having any telomere shortening, just by the telomeres being dysfunctional. This is a drug that was developed by close friends of mine in Texas not very many years ago. It's now being taken forward commercially by a group in Illinois. It's recruiting for phase 2 at this point, so I am extremely hopeful about that.
Excellent. Now, what would you say to a comment like this one from Super Thin Guy, who writes, telomerase doesn't cause cancer because reproductive cells always have telomerase, but they don't get cancer. So is it rather that with more telomerase expression, the cells that eventually become cancerous because of some mutation are more likely to survive?
Yeah, basically that's it. So, I mean, essentially, reproductive cells, germ cells as they're normally called, they do indeed express telomerase, and a respectable amount of it. And indeed, as the guy says, they don't typically become cancerous. But there's two reasons for that. Number one is that they are not expressing as much telomerase as cancer. A bigger reason is that they are under deep selective pressure. Most germ cells don't get to be actual germ cells. But the third reason actually is the most important, perhaps, that they actually express higher levels of DNA repair machinery than somatic cells. So that means that it's much less likely that a germ cell will accumulate the other mutations that are necessary for a cell to become cancerous, and thus be able to become cancerous more easily as a result of not needing additionally to turn on telomerase. That's the basic thing. That telomerase is just one thing. It's because it's being turned on rather than being turned off by a mutation. It's actually the last thing that typically happens in a cancer. And therefore, if you suddenly don't need to do it, then it does make things much worse, much more dangerous in cells that don't have particularly good DNA repair and maintenance machinery, and thus are prone to accumulate the other mutations.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. I hope that addresses the distinction that Superfin Guy was making. Now, David Shoemaker wonders what sparked the idea of putting on Longevity Summit Dublin. I know you see it as a continuation of your prior conference.
Right, so here I have to give all the credit to Martin O'D, who is based here and who for some years has wanted to do a conference of this nature. It was originally going to put it on 2 years ago, and obviously COVID screwed that. But he stuck to his guns, he put the game together, he was persistent, and so now it happened. The involvement of me as co-organizer and as, overseer of the program and so on, that was a relatively recent thing. It just made sense for the two of us to come together to do that. But really, the idea of having this summit in Dublin at all is entirely Martin.
Yes, so thank you for that. And of course, we spoke to Martin earlier, and he has done an excellent job putting on this event. And certainly, I think the potential for the entire field to take off from here, especially if prominent officials in Ireland take notice, and this sets off a domino effect in other countries.
Yeah, it's often useful that to have something in a country which is not one of the usual suspects, if you like. A country that perhaps considered to be a rather small country in terms of both size and population and size of the economy and so on. They're a country where taking on something big allows them to make a big noise.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much, Aubrey, for once again being so generous with your time. Ben Ballweg wonders, are there any last words you're able or willing to share about events to come, as well as any message that you have for our audience today?
Well, there will be plenty more events, that's for sure. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that events in real life, face-to-face conferences, have the most indescribable value in terms of their, contribution to the progression of any movement, and certainly this movement. In terms of other last words, well, I guess I've got to say, listen to what I've had to say tomorrow, because there's plenty I'm going to say tomorrow. And thank you all for your interest in all of this, and thank you, Gennady, of course, for doing this podcast.
Yes, thank you so much, Aubrey, and cheers. I will toast you with my Coke Zero.
All right, thanks so much.
Yes, live long and prosper, Aubrey.
I will get back to talking to the rest of the people in the conference.
Wonderful, thank you. And this, of course, has been a great honor for us to be joined by Aubrey de Grey himself. And we have more for you today from Longevity Summit Dublin. We have another attendee, Brenda Ramokopelwa, who joins us all the way from South Africa. Now, some of you may remember Brenda, who joined us earlier to talk about the TAFT's Gen 4 IR Summit, which was held earlier this year in August. So How was your trip to Dublin, and what are your impressions thus far, Brenda?
Oh my, the trip has been absolutely amazing. And I mean, this is the first day, and I've been able to meet so many people that I've gotten to know online. But getting to meet them in person has been absolutely amazing. The likes of you, Liz, and Aubrey, I met last month when he visited South Africa, when we had the Gen4IR conference. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing to be here. I mean, it's my first time in Ireland. And yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yes, and we were discussing some possibilities for essentially transforming some of the African countries into hubs of innovation in the longevity field. So when you held the Gen4IR Summit, what did you observe about the attitudes of government officials in terms of their willingness to make that a reality?
So one thing about what we do at TAGS is we encourage collaboration, be it within us as officers of the organization. You would know that we are globally represented as an organization, so collaboration is core to everything that we do. So with Gen4IR conference, what we were striving for was to encourage that collaboration to extend outside of our organization to include private organization, public organization, or public institutes and private organization. We were able to achieve that in attendance at our conference. The government officials, they supported as sponsors. The tourism department was one of our key sponsors at our conference. And we had some of those government officials actually attending the conference for the duration from the first day up until the last day. And they expressed their support for what we do, specifically at the launch of Afro Longevity, which will be the first longevity hub in the African continent. We are hoping to cover all 54 countries and advocate for the curing of age-related diseases, and driving a movement that will educate people more about healthy living and some of these interventions that we are finding out about. They were quite excited about what's coming down the line. I must say, there was a little bit of shock, might be an extreme word, but when they heard about life extension and some of the therapy, some of the things that are being done, I mean, they were, I think some of the people were hearing about cryonics for the first time, as was presented by Jose Coeurnelle. And for them, in the first day, you could see the reaction was quite uncomfortable. But as the day progressed and as more information came, I mean, we had presentation from Natasha Vitamo, we had presentation from Aubrey, we had Jose explaining a little bit more about where we are going with this. And on the second day, we had a lot more people asking for more information about this and getting interested about this. So for us as an organization, that is a good start, because when we have people wanting more, when we have people asking questions, it is saying, this opportunity to do more, this opportunity to educate and bring these people along. And I think that your question is, far as government is concerned, the fact that we had representation from them and them saying, we want to be part of this, we want to know more about this, and the fact that we are here today learning more from the experts and taking that back to the country, it is positive for Afro longevity. And this is only the second month, so we can only imagine what will happen in the next 6 months, the next 6 years, and yes, we're looking forward to that.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Brenda, for your overview, and thank you also, John H., for your generous contribution. We appreciate that. And Brenda, what would you say were the highlights of day one of the Longevity Summit for you? Because you attended a lot of the sessions.
So the highlights for me, being new to the field, so to say, I mean, for me, it was one, meeting the people that I've been able to engage with online, and meeting them for the first time was quite key and important for me. Introducing Afro longevity to them and what we are trying to do there. The interest that I saw and that I had when I was having these conversations with them in terms of the fact that Africa has not been tapped. Africa will be the first time that it is coming into the industry or into the field, and the possibilities of what Africa can offer and what Africa can learn from what has already been done. I think that those conversations have been so instrumental and so important to me, and I think will be important to TEFS as an organization overall, especially given what we are trying to do in terms of innovation from a technology point of view, longevity from an Afro longevity point of view, and overall our mission to open the gateway into and out of Africa for young futures. So I sat and I listened to all these discoveries, and from young people, especially, and not discounting what the older people were saying, which was absolutely amazing because they've got so much wealth of knowledge, having been in the industry for so long. But I think I was especially intrigued by the young people who were presenting some of their findings. I mean, I met a 17-year-old who is saying, I learned about this and I'm interested in it. I mean, it took me back. I've got a 17-year-old that I attended the Gen 4 IR conference, and she was part of the planning. She said, Mani, I want to do this, I want to do that. So what is this about? That interest. And I've got a 12-year-old also that's interested. So seeing that there are young people that are already in the movement and in the field, it is encouraging for me. It is encouraging to TEFS, especially given what we're trying to do to develop people when they're still young, and also to introduce this concept at a very young age, so that it becomes preventative.
Yes.
Other than waiting for the cure to come.
Yes, and of course, Africa is known as the world's youngest continent right now, but also a continent where the life expectancy has been increasing rapidly. So do you think that today's young people in Africa, when they observe these changes happening before their eyes, when they observe people in previous generations living a lot longer than they used to, and they also get knowledge about rejuvenation research, longevity research in other parts of the world, that they will experience a paradigm shift in their minds, and they will want to get involved, and they will see this as an avenue where they can advance themselves and make a difference to the broader world and to the lifespans of their fellow citizens of their countries.
Absolutely, and I think not a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is required for the older generations in Africa. The younger ones are ready, they are there, they've been there. They just need the opportunity to be able to be part of the journey and do what needs to be done to make sure that it benefits their community. As you rightly said, you've got a whole lot of young people. Most of those people are tech-savvy. Unfortunately, the infrastructure doesn't allow them to, grow, develop themselves beyond what they already have. There's a lot of brain drain in Africa because, again, some of those limitations that we have, be it leadership, be it this, be it that, if one wants to develop or wants to grow in their career, they have to go outside to tap into that. What we would like to see happening in the next year, 5 years, is to see that knowledge, that talent coming back into the continent and deploying all of that into the continent. So as we will be working with a lot of our partners across the world, what we are hoping to do is to tap into their knowledge, transfer the skill into Africa. Because one thing that we really do not want to do is the mistake that has been done over years, over a long period in Africa, where we just take what is being done in the East and West and we want to apply it in Africa. And you find that it doesn't fit.
Right.
We want to apply solutions that are fit for purpose. We want to take into consideration the maturity level in Africa. We want to also look at, Africa as a continent, but diverse, in the sense that we've got 54 different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds. So I cannot apply what I apply in South Africa in Nigeria, and Nigeria cannot apply what it applies in Uganda. We need to understand the different environments and see what will work here and how does it work in another country, and then we bring all of that together. It is an exciting time, an exciting environment to be in, but also a challenging one which needs to really be approached with the required sensitivity. But at the same time, there's a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of people that are saying we are really doing it. And we are grateful for the people that are supporting us from outside, because that experience is going to be so useful and so it's really, really needed for us to be able to leapfrog. And maybe things that are not possible in the other countries, as far as accelerating what needs to be done in the longevity field, maybe that might be easier and possible in Africa.
Yes, thank you very much, Brenda, and I certainly hope so. Now, before we continue, I would like to acknowledge our friends from Ageless Partners for their generous contribution. And of course, we had Jason Mercurio and Andreas Milheda as our guests for a previous virtual enlightenment salon. So we are happy to have them among our audience today. Now, with regard to the unique African approaches that would be needed to cultivate a longevity industry, what would you say would be some of the differences in terms of approaches that might work in a Western European country or in the United States, but wouldn't work as well in Africa, or what could work well in Africa that wouldn't work in the US or in Western Europe? And another question along these lines is, in what countries do you think a robust longevity industry could arrive the soonest?
So there's a lot of questions packed into one.
Sure.
So I mean, if I start to think about the culture in Africa, it's Africans tends to be, and I'll use the word cynical. Might be right. It depends on who's hearing it. In the sense that they're very careful of what comes in into the environment and how they absorb it. This is informed by the past experiences, where people come in and do things only for their own benefit, only for them to reform. So sometimes when something is new, it is very difficult to convince them it is for their benefit. So we need to, education becomes very important. We need to make sure that they understand it. We also need to make sure that we check the environment to see that is it real or is it just painted as the right thing for them. So, for example, let's say declaring, aging is a disease. It's not something that we can just punt and say, this is what it is. There needs to be education that needs to happen before that. Awareness, educating them about longevity, what it is. What does it take you to get there? How does it affect you? How is it going to benefit you? And, how can you become part of it? before we get to that stage, and then we can easily get them there. So for African, it's always about me, but also how does it affect my community? Everything is communal. So you need to take into consideration the culture, you need to take into consideration the beliefs, you need to take into consideration the structure from a legal and statutory point of view. One thing that I can say is, from a legal point of view, especially, and I'm going to give South Africa as an example because that's where I am from, post-apartheid, things have changed so much. We've got a whole lot of young blood in the parliamentary system who have got a voice and who are able to champion some of these things. I mean, I talk about, putting science and technology at the forefront of cardinal pillars, which is something that Osinakachi, the founder of TAPS, is very passionate about. And, we've got young people that are in the field and they are sitting as, parliamentarians, and they can voice that on our behalf. So I have found that as compared to other areas, the changing laws becomes a bit more flexible. There's a voice of young people coming in. There's a voice of people that at least are excited about change and advancement of science and technology that can be able to push some of these things forward, unlike in other areas where it's much more restricted or much more spaghetti, so to say. So because it is a young democracy, it is easier to change and convince as long as you can prove the concept. So that's what we want to try and see if we can be able to do. And it's not going to be easy, but I think there's an opportunity for that to happen, and maybe that might be a real game changer.
Yes. It seems there are some commonalities between what I heard from you and what we heard from Martin earlier today, because it seems that countries without an entrenched political establishment, countries without essentially a top-heavy ruling infrastructure that has been in place for a long time, could be more receptive to change, to innovative, potentially even radical ideas that could dramatically transform those countries. So Ireland is a fairly small country, and it's easier for someone like Martin to influence people in the highest positions of leadership, whereas in the United States, it would be a Herculean task to do something like that. And in South Africa, you mentioned the fairly recent in historic terms transition from apartheid toward a genuine democracy and freedom for people in South Africa. So that allows for a kind of more nimble, more dynamic set of structures in government, which may be more receptive to longevity.
And I think to add to that, I think it is the proximity. I mean, South Africa has got about 58 million people. So it's not a lot as compared to other countries in Africa. And that means, and we've got a whole lot of government or politicians. Yes, they still want to push their political agenda, but they are still on the ground. So you are able to get closer to them easier than in another country that has got a lot more people and then a lot more entrenched political system. So I think in that way it becomes easier to get your message heard or your voice heard. And I think another thing also is the fact that when the democracy is young, there's the appetite for change and appetite for growth is there. So there's so many approaches that you can use to be able to get to them. For example, right now in South Africa, key is economic development. Longevity can really go a long way in contributing to the economic development. I mean, if you think about what it can bring in terms of changing the health system, in terms of change in manufacturing industries, in terms of employment that is at an all-time low, in terms of education, changing the way we do education. I think it's just a massive opportunity that any sane person who's really interested in turning the wheel would be stupid to let go.
Yes, indeed. Now, we have one final question for you, Brenda, and it comes from Ben Ballweg. He is wondering, what is your take on receptiveness in Africa to the potentially paradigm-challenging concepts like life extension and transhumanism as compared to how those would be perceived in Europe or the United States? Because many Africans are new to these ideas. What spectrum of responses have you encountered thus far when speaking with people in Africa about them?
It varies. As I said, 54 countries, different backgrounds, different structures in terms of how they look at things and how they approach things. So education becomes very important. The communication, and communication in this sense is how it is received by the person that you're talking to. The fact that I understand anything is absolutely amazing. It doesn't matter to them. It is how they understand it, bearing in mind the religious, cultural, and all of that. So I think, with each country or with each audience that you talk to, it becomes different. I really, really think that Africans are ready for change, and they are excited about any change that leads to advancement of their economy, advancement of Africa as a continent. And I think, changes like this is something that all Africans will be happy about, and I'm looking forward to. The key to it is it has to be beneficial to them as individuals, to their communities as well. And, we need to make sure that they are involved, not just adopting what has been done outside, but it has to be fit for purpose. It has to be, it has to be relevant to them. And, it has to be something that it's really, really going to benefit them in the long term. So it's going to be a long journey. It's step by step. We've started in South Africa. We have representation in Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, Uganda, and Kenya, where we're going next, in Rwanda. And we are hoping that every year, every step, we are bringing another African country in, and we can share and transfer the knowledge so that it becomes, and most importantly, stop the brain drain that is happening in the African continent. All of those scientists that have left the country because the infrastructure and the government doesn't support their development, we would like to see them coming back into the continent and deploying some of these things to the benefit.
Wonderful. Well, this is definitely a very ambitious goal, but you have a plan for implementing it. You have a sequence of steps in mind, and the countries where you think the likelihood of success is higher initially. So you also have a very dedicated organization with TAFTS, the Transdisciplinary Agora, for future discussions. And we, of course, have had extensive interactions with TAFTS before, and I would like to convey my regards to Osinakachi Akumakalu, the founder of TAFTS, who I know has been with us in the audience. And this truly speaks to the power of the connections that we have built in the longevity movement, connections that are spreading all over the world. It's just astonishing that in the space of a few years, we've gone to a point where we can sit here in Dublin, communicating to an international audience. Many of us on this stream are from the United States, and I'm speaking to someone who came all the way from South Africa and is giving us a perspective that could be relevant in slightly different ways to 54 different African countries. So that's just amazing, and we hope that that kind of global spread of longevity and transhumanism will continue. So thank you very much, Brenda, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank a lot of people that I've met here. I've met David Wood, I've met Didier, who are here at the conference as well. These are the people that I've only been able to speak to either on email or online through this. Yourselves for the support that you've given me. We've got Liz Parrish here as well. She's been absolutely amazing. I mean, we've got Aubrey de Grey, who's been very supportive of what we do at TEFS. I might not have mentioned other names, but there's a lot of people present here and also present in Dublin today that we really are grateful for your support as TEFS. And we hope that we will continue this journey with your support going forward.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Brenda. And I'm sure we both look forward to the next 2 days of the conference. Indeed. So we have one more guest joining us in the last 8 minutes of our salon. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work and your impressions of Longevity Summit thus far. You are a Hexagon. You are wearing a Hexagon hoodie.
I am a Hexagon. My name is Bradley B. I'm from the United States, and I come over here as part of the Hex community to support Aubrey and what he believes in.
Yes, and of course the Hexagon community has been instrumental to a major fundraising push for Aubrey that occurred last year, where cumulatively they contributed over $28 million. And now, of course, we are fortunate to have some of those resources be devoted to something that will be announced tomorrow, but I'm not going to say anything more about that. But where do you see the interface between a crypto-oriented community like Hex and longevity? Because as Aubrey pointed out, there is a lot of overlap between those two communities. So what brings about this affinity between them?
Well, the crypto community, especially the Hexagon community, and the founder, Richard Hart, believes in Aubrey's long-term objectives. And when you look at things, you know, especially in the Hexagon community, a lot of us have made considerable amounts of money. And I look at it like this. Somebody like, I'm going to pick on him, but somebody like Steve Jobs, okay, one of the richest men in the world, but this is where he got it wrong, right? He could have used tons of that money for medical research, tons of that money to live longer. So in the broad scheme of things, that's what the crypto community wants to do. I don't mind dying, but I don't want to get sick to do it, so to speak. So all of us in the crypto community, we get together. This is a very strong Richard Hart crypto Hex community, and we raised 27 million, and that's probably just the tip of the hat of what we can do in the future when things turn around a little bit.
That is quite promising. So for those of the audience members who might not be as familiar with Hex and the premise behind Hex, could you explain it a bit?
Yeah, Hex is, in a nutshell, Hex is a better form of Bitcoin. It's a proof of stake where Bitcoin, you have to pay miners to destroy the environment to mint coins. Hex pays the stakers to mint coins. It's been around for about 1,000 days. And it was really invented to eliminate the middleman. It's a decentralized, immutable code that can never be changed. It's been running flawlessly for 1,000 days. If you were thinking about it, you're blessed because we're on a 90% dip right now. So you could be, when things come back, if you know anything about crypto, Bitcoin, the institutional money is already in there. So when things turn around, which one's going to pump harder, so to speak? Right? One that's been around Bitcoin's been around since 2007.
2009, I believe.
2009,
yes.
Correct. 2009. Yep. So all the institutional money and so forth has kind of already entered that, where the HEX community, we have about, I think there's 150 streamers right now that are streaming about it. But it's still gate kept. So once it comes back, it's going to be great. And then we're also creating a whole new chain called the Pulse chain, which anything on the Ethereum network, you're going to get a copy of everything over on the Pulse chain network. So that's some good things cooking in the future.
Very interesting. And what have been your observations of Longevity Summit Dublin thus far? Any highlights for you?
Well, honestly, this is the first time I've met Aubrey in person. He seemed, I like his macro picture on longevity, not just like years type of thing, more of a long-term approach on the longevity. I listened to one of his talks today, sat in the front row, and I enjoyed it because the longevity research and the whole thing to me is probably similar to somebody that doesn't know anything about crypto that's listening to me talk. It's going, whoa. So I'm here to learn, and so far I'm having a great time. This is my first time in Dublin as well.
Excellent. Yes, mine also. So for anyone from our panel, we have 3 minutes left. Does anyone have a question for Bradley while we have him?
I got a question.
Yes.
All the times I've seen Richard speak, I've never heard him say the T word. So do you have any insight as to why Richard Hart never says the T word?
T word. A little bit more information.
Word is
Transhumanist.
Yes, transhumanist.
Transhumanist. No, I don't.
So, well, it's an interesting question whether Richard Hart identifies as a transhumanist or not, but that may be a question we get to ask him later on.
Maybe we can.
Yes,
Okay.
because he has been a big supporter of Aubrey, certainly, and of longevity research. So his mind is inclined in that direction. And he had been a volunteer for the SENS Research Foundation many, many years ago, which is how he became connected with Aubrey. So this is a situation of a person who really made his way up in the world and then decided to give back to causes that he has always been an enthusiastic supporter of. So we need more people like that, people who become extremely wealthy and then can contribute to longevity science.
He's also made a lot of other people extremely wealthy.
Very interesting.
And if you get it right, you'll be wealthy in the future.
Yes.
Didier, do you have any comments in the last minute or so?
Yeah, it's a comment. It's a question. So great what you are saying, and you are among people, let's say, in favor of investing here crypto money. And at the end of the day, this money is to accelerate research, and especially to accelerate clinical research. So, and they are still for longevity very slow. So what are you thinking that could accelerate now that it seems that we really have more money to really accelerate the clinical research itself, the clinical research for longevity, of course? And what could you do?
Yes. So Bradley, what do you think the HEX community could do to accelerate clinical research for longevity?
Well, throw money at it. That's get the word out and throw money at it. That's
I would say there is a lot of money normally, for example, from evolution, but still the clinical trials are not starting. So maybe I'm thinking a lot here. You should give money, something like in the condition that the clinical trials are starting in the 6 months or something like that, you know.
Yes, and I would suggest, Bradley, that you and others from the HEX community interface with Didier, because Didier has also been quite a generous donor to longevity initiatives, and he has some experience with setting up conditions to make sure
that the research proceeds according to the certain parameters. So a
At
very
a smaller level.
very constructive discussion. And Didier, you are an extremely generous man. It's an honor to have you here. And thank you to our worldwide audience for joining us today. This has been a phenomenal session from Longevity Summit Dublin. Unfortunately, we are going to have to conclude for the night. It is quite late here in Dublin, but to everybody here, these are times of immense positive change. So keep your spirits up, and I hope you all live long and prosper.